Hi there. In this video we'll take a look at a very similar layout as what we did with the business card, but instead we'll use perspective in conjunction with some of the items that we manipulate. So I'm going to create a new document. There we go. And I'll choose print, and I'm using portrait, and I choose create. Now I'm going to open up my perspective tool, which is my perspective grid tool. So if I choose Shift P on my keyboard, that creates that grid. Now we can manipulate this thing using these little dots here. See, that moves the perspective grid to a location in the document. This one over here does the same thing. These ones here kind of changes how we'd be looking at that perspective, either further away or closer. You can think of that. And then these little diamonds here allow us to change the angle that we're looking at that object. Or you can also think of that as the shape of the object, angle or shape. And then this affects how we, basically the height. There's a couple of other controls there as well that you can mess around with, see what they do. You can open it up like a gate, etc. We also have, I'm just going to undo that stuff. Control Z works as well. That's pretty good. We also have some presets as well. So if we go View, Perspective Grid, 1-point perspective. That's one of our presets. We have View, Perspective Grid, 3-point perspective. So that's a little bit of how to manipulate the perspective grid once we have it. So I'm just going to close this document and not save changes. And I'm going to go ahead and use Bridge to open up Package Start AI. So that has an object already created with the perspective grid, as well as a logo. So I'm going to place this logo onto this plane here. So I'm going to use my selection tool and select the background and the logo. That's easy to do this time because there's nothing around it. I'm going to choose, click on these three dots here, and I'm going to use the perspective selection tool. So I'm going to hold down Shift and tap my V. Now I'm using my perspective selection tool. Now I want to place this object here on this plane, which is right here, this plane here. So I select that plane, and now I don't want to move it, I want to copy it. So I'm going to hold down Alt. And I'm just going to drag that right on to the box. And center it, so I'm going to put it on the grid lines there and make sure it's not sticking out at the top. And let go of the mouse and deselect. And you see we now have that logo on our box employing perspective. And now I'm just going to put that photo of the sleeping bag on the box as well. And again, I want to warp it so it follows that perspective as well. So I'm just going to open up Bridge here. And it's resized so that I can see both Bridge and Adobe Illustrator. I'm just going to drag that sleeping bag right on to the artboard. Now I'm going to resize that. I'm going to use a shift drag. That resizes the width and the height proportionally. I'm also going to use Alt when I drag. That'll resize from the middle. So I'm just going to double click on my magnifying glass to zoom out so I can see everything. I'm just going to use my selection tool and hold down Shift, Alt, and just drag that so it's about the same size as the box. Now, in order to manipulate this with perspective, I need to rasterize that. That's basically to convert the little pixels that make up this bitmap image into curves to make it a vector image. So the way I do that is I go Object, Rasterize. I'm going to use 150 pixels per inch. That's good for a mock-up. If I go to print, I'll probably want to use 300. But for now, it's good for 150. It's a little quicker. I choose OK. Then now I'm going to choose Image Trace. And right now it's black and white, but I want to see it a little better than that. So under the preset, I'm going to choose Hi-Fi Photo. And then I'm going to choose Expand. So now instead of little dots, I have a bunch of vector shapes that make up that image. So now I can warp those using perspective. While it was bitmaps, I couldn't have warped it. As we saw before, we can use bitmaps in Adobe Illustrator, but if we want to employ perspective, we need to rasterize. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to crop this item so it's in a little square on the front of the box. Now, in order to draw this square so it's not in perspective, I'm just going to click outside of all of these planes. I don't want this square to match any of these planes yet. So I'm going to use my rectangle tool and I'm just going to click outside so I don't match any planes quite yet. So that nothing's blue in there. And then I'm going to draw a square basically around just the top of that red shape and just to the top of the sleeping bag. So maybe right about here. Now if you want to draw a square with the rectangle tool, you hold down Shift. That'll constrain the width and height to be the same. And the square I'm drawing has a white outline, a white fill and no outline. So if you drew something other than that, if with a texture fill, make sure you have white outline selected. You can have a black stroke if you like. I'm going to leave the stroke off. Now I want basically this square to clip this, or you can think of it as cropping this sleeping bag. So I'm going to choose my selection tool. I'm going to click on my square. I'm going to hold down Shift and I'm going to click on my sleeping bag. Selects everything. Now I choose Object, Clipping Mask, and Make. So now we just have that cut out in a nice little square that we can position easily on the box. Now I want to resize this as well. So I still have the clipping mask selected. I haven't clicked away to deselect it. I'm going to make sure we have that constrained so it remains a square. So make sure there's no line through it like that. And then I'm going to type in 3.5 inches. 3.5 inches. Enter. And now we have a nice little sleeping bag that's 3.5 inches. Now I just want to place it here. So I'm going to choose my perspective selection tool. So again, Shift V. And I want to put it on this plane here. So now I just drag it. And you see, I'm just going to center it on there. Let go of my mouse, and now it's placed on the box. Now, one thing, I don't want these white shapes here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click away. I'm going to click on my selection tool. I'm going to double click on the shape, and that'll get me into the sub shapes that make it up. So if I double click, you see I'm going to clip group. I can double click again, and then I click once. Now I have that white area selected, and I'm just going to choose no fill. I'll do the same thing over here. I'm going to click away, double click out, double click on it, double click on that shape there, and click once on that shape, and then no fill, and then double click away. So there's my package. To really get an idea of how it looks, I'm going to hide my perspective grid. So I'll choose View, Perspective Grid, Hide Grid. So again, very much like what we did with the business card, however, we employed perspective to manipulate those objects so they fit the actual shape of the box. Thanks so much for watching.